talked to has absolutely loved her presentations and found things within her presentations that they could take back to their classrooms. So she has, she's a retired professor in, by the way, speech communication.
That was really why I got invited back.
Honestly, when I first started reading about her, and I found her, I think we did a talk at Penn State at a conference at one point, and I read the review of the talk, and I thought, well, this sounds really good. And she's written books. Oh, let's look further. And so at that point, I didn't realize that her background was in speech communication. But she moved from there to managing a center, much like our teaching academy, for about 10 years or so. And you've done a number of other things in her career. The most exciting of which to me is she's published some wonderful books on teaching. One of which we had last year, if you'll recall, Learner-Centered Teaching, which was just rich with ideas, you know, for use in the classroom. And this year's book, as you know, was Inspired College Teaching, which several people have just spontaneously said, let me write a paragraph about that book for the newsletter, which is kind of exciting, you know, for us to get a spontaneous invitation. So we're very excited about welcoming back Maryallen Weimar to our speaker series, our Bailey speaker series. So come on up, Maryallen, and let's...
I'll take things. I'm good. Thank you. Yeah, well, the problem with being invited back is, you know, what if you're a real dud? We're talking about bad dreams when we started here, so that would be my bad dream, not to be able to do a decent job. But I am happy to be here, and I was nervous yesterday because I took the last plane out of State College, and you know, one of the last planes into Little Rock, and so a person is always like, oh my God, you know, what if they? But we actually got 30 minutes early into Detroit and 30 minutes early into Little Rock, so I'm sure I'll have a long flight home tomorrow. Don't have that kind of good fortune. But anyway, I'm happy that you're here, and really hope that in the hour that we have together, that this can really be a discussion and interaction. One of the reasons that I keep doing these kind of things is that it's a wealth of insight and enlarged understanding and new ideas for me too. So I will be inviting you to participate in this session about participation. And you know, you write a book and you get really kind of like immersed in that, and then when you're done with it, I don't know, some of you probably have the same experience. I mean, I haven't even been able to bring myself to read this book yet. I always, after they're like, oh, you're sort of like, oh my God, if you read it and it's done, then you're going to be, but you're ready to move on to something else. And I've been, the last year or so, got interested in thinking about some of the kind of tried and true instructional strategies that we all use all the time as a vehicle for getting faculty to sort of be more reflective and systematic in thinking about some of these instructional practices that are really commonplace. And so I sort of landed on participation. You know, it's a simple, straightforward technique. I think nowadays virtually all faculty members use it or aspire to use it. And so I've been kind of exploring what has been discovered about participation in the research and trying to think through some ways to maybe increase our effectiveness of the strategy and at the same time use it as a vehicle to get us to sort of understand the complexities and challenges that are a part of teaching, even with a very simple, straightforward strategy. So we'll start out with just a quick kind of review. You can just help me with this here. So why do we bother with something? And by participation, I'm simply talking about, you know, the kind of exchange between teachers and students that have in class. So why do you do that? What goals does it? What does it help you achieve? Or why do you use it?
To know if they're getting it.
Okay, very good. That's Margaret, right? Okay. Yeah, very good. It's a source of feedback for the teacher, you know, so you ask a question and based on the answer, or you do a poll, and you can kind of track down if there's misunderstandings or not. Absolutely right. Points for that answer. Okay, why else? Yeah.
To help them get it.
To help them get it, exactly. And how does that work?
Just involvement is much better than more effective than just listening.
That's right. And so, I mean, I think that's one of the, there's a couple of different goals that it can accomplish there too, because I think that participation is really a way of preparing students for academic discourse. You know, it's a chance for them to sort of understand how, you know, those sort of the old Socratic dialogue notion of a question and an answer and a question and an answer leading to a larger sort of understanding. So I think I heard that in what you're saying. Also said you know it's engagement. They're sort of working. The other thing that goes right along with that too is that I think it's an opportunity for students to practice using the language of the discipline. You know, I mean, a lot of times we have different ways of, you know, using words or different pieces of, you know, words or jargon that are a part of the discipline. And this is not the way students normally talk. They don't talk like a mathematician talks, or you can always talk, I mean, always just, now I always think it's kind of amazing to go to the bathroom in the airports, you know, you got people texting and talking and flushing and but you know what, there were two, I was in the women's room, there were two women, they were economics professors from somewhere, and they were having this heavy-duty dialogue about this cost-benefit analysis of such and such and so on, and it was other people were just like looking at them. It was a whole different language to most people that were in there. So participation is a chance for people to practice using the discipline. Okay, so I think we've got about 3 or 4 now. Why else? Yeah, thanks.
I can use it to gauge what they're bringing to the table.
And describe that a little, talk a little more.
Well, when I start with a new topic,
right,
assuming that they haven't read anything, which is a pretty good assumption.
Yes, yes.
I'd like to see where they stand from what their life experience has taught them about it.
Okay, all right. So that too, that is also a kind of a feedback for the instructor, but also a kind of feedback for the students, so they can see where they are in relationship. What do you teach?
Journalism.
Oh, that's right. I remember you. Yeah, right. Okay.
Yeah. I like to pull them away from just the textbook and have them understand how what they're learning applies to their life and how it fits in with what they want to do with their career.
And so that's a function of getting them to ask questions.
To get them to ask questions
answer.
and to get them to answer questions.
Okay.
To get a discussion going in the classroom.
Right.
And I find that once I can get the discussion going, after the first 2 or 3 people have talked, I can't shut them up.
Yeah.
They all want to talk.
Yeah, those are the good days in class. Right. Yeah. Right. Please.
I think it also helps build their confidence.
Absolutely.
So, you know, I've seen it when a student will make a comment and I'll say, that's right, and you see the smile and the...
Exactly. See, that's where Carol and I are going to chirp in, that it's an opportunity to develop some pretty important communication skills. You know, being able to speak spontaneously, extemporaneously, in front of a group of people and, you know, not curl up and pass away. Yeah, so that's, I think, really good too. Yeah.
It forces the class to be more student-centered.
Yeah, yeah, it does.
And there are at least 2 of us that teach language here, so
well,
participation is essential.
It's essential, exactly. I think some of the rest of us would do well to try to teach French or Spanish, you know, because it would force us to, it's just one of those things that you can't learn without doing it. And doing it in a real, you know, sort of oral way. Okay, so I think you got most of the things that I had on my list. It adds interest, aids understanding. I think that was the guy in the blue shirt, the big guy in the blue shirt.
David.
David, another David. Related to that, David?
I'm not sure.
Okay, engages students. I mean, the thing is, it engages, and sometimes you don't want to forget the kind of, you know, real kind of way in which that works. You know, in our culture, if you ask a question, there is a very strong norm that people have to respond. You know, even if I meet you and say, hi, how are you? It is rude if you don't say something. You know, you have to say something. So when you ask a question in class, there is that sense. Now, a lot of students are really good at indicating that they don't want to participate when you ask a question. You know, how you look around and all of a sudden people that have had good eye contact are not looking at you anymore. You know, people that have never taken notes are taking notes, you know. And but it creates that kind of urgency, or it can, the whole class is on edge when you ask a question before somebody answers. Now, if you've got an over-participator in your class, then you've also got everybody kind of on edge, wondering if Dave is going to come through, you know, and help us get this show on the road. Okay? A lot of faculty tend to be over-participators, so, you know, don't take offense here. Okay. Do any of you use participation as a vehicle to sort of do classroom management stuff? In the sense that if somebody falls asleep, you can call on that person if you're real old and curmudgeonly. Someone suggested to me, and I think this is a little bit kinder and gentler, is to call on the person next to the person who's sleeping. And I found that really works quite successfully. Because all of a sudden the voice is, you know, like, and it's really quite comical to watch the student wake up, you know, going back and forth there too. It's the way of controlling. We also use it to control who's participating and how often. So we can use that too. And I think it also offers a way for teachers to begin to establish a relationship with the class. Okay? It conveys a lot of important nonverbal messages about how accessible you might be, about whether or not you value student contributions, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through. Okay, so it's a strategy that we can use to accomplish a lot of fairly important goals in class. Okay, now what I did, the handout, I actually was worried that maybe the handout is a little bit too depressing, because what the handout does is a real quick and dirty review of the literature, which and again, now don't, you know, I've never observed any of you teach, so this stuff may not at all be true of your classroom. Part of the power of this kind of research is that it forces us to really think about what's happening in our own classrooms, okay? So you've got stuff on that list that indicates that teachers don't devote very much time to participation in the classroom. Now, the sort of hallmark study is the second one, which was done in 1983, and that's hundreds of years ago. So maybe things have changed. Again, I think the point is that you want to kind of think about in your own classroom how much time is actually devoted to interaction with students. Even more recently, and again, I've got samples here. This is not an extensive review of literature. A large percentage of students never talk in class. Never talk in class. Somewhere around 50%, according to this research. Okay? A small number of students do most of the talking. This stuff is just what they call a sort of a consolidation of participation responsibility. I love jargon here, you know. And very early in the course, it's established whether or not there's going to be over-participation. You can see from some of these numbers here, 28% of the students participating making 89% of the comments in class. Okay, so I mean, and again, these are useful just for you to you know, kind of analyze in your own class whether or not that's a problem. So kind of incriminating stuff about the kind of questions that we ask. Frequently, we're not asking questions that challenge higher order thinking, but we're asking what are basically closed questions. How many electrons in the third main level? You know, I mean, and those questions, again, those are not, the power of those questions is to sort of get the dialogue going, to sort of, I think they work well to kind of warm up the crowd, but at some point, you got to start asking questions that are, you know, that go beyond those sorts of things. There's a few other things that I think are, I wanted to mention. Oftentimes when students are participating, I problems, okay, which I haven't done any research documentation, but which I'd be interested in your reaction to. When a student is participating, the other students aren't listening to what that student says. Okay, that you know, it's just like, well, come on, teacher, we'll take notes on what you're saying. One time, a number of years ago in class, I had a sort of serendipitous happening now, which I conspire to make happen in class. A student gave an answer, which was really quite interesting, but very different, and something that I hadn't thought of at all. And the honest to God truth was, I didn't quite know how to respond to what the student had said. And so I just said to the student, I said, you know, I said, that is such an interesting answer. Let me make a couple of notes. I'd really like to think about that and respond to you tomorrow. So without any noise, I just went back behind the podium and started just writing myself a couple quick notes. And all around the class, the students were like going, what did she say? What did she say? and because the teacher was writing out, so then, you know, so now I just actually practice that as a strategy. A student will say something, and I'll say, gee, I want to remember that answer. It's a really good one. And if you write it down, then all of a sudden, all around the room, students are paying attention to what that student said. Oftentimes when there's participations, it really is just a two-way interaction that takes place in the presence of everybody else. Okay, but it's just you. So when you talk about it being a device for feedback, you're getting feedback from one student. Okay, which is why it's always useful if you can spare the time to get 2 or 3 students responding rather than just the one, so you're not assuming that everyone does the same things too. Students speak in class without being very well prepared. Oh, without having done the reading, you know, without having carefully thought through. That's kind of the purpose. Students ask way too many questions about procedure. How many pages is that paper supposed to be? You know? Oh, golly. One time I was working with a group in teaching developmental English, and they were like, well, how many words do you want that to be? You know, how many words? We need to know how long it is. You know, the answer, well, as long as it takes, is just like causes people to need, students to need mental health counseling, you know. And so finally, in exasperation, I said, the paragraph should be 238 words, you know, thinking it was a joke. Well, everything. And when I cleaned out my office when I retired, I actually found a paper that I had kept that stopped, God is my witness, mid-sentence. And then there was 238 in a circle. And so, you know, so anyway, so they're focused on, you know, when they first start participating, they're focused on asking questions about procedures. Sometimes students speak for points, not to make points. If you're grading the participation and you've got, you know, one of those kind of overachievers, I know, I have to admit, I was one of these very people. I remember a history class I took, and I was an undergraduate, and we got full participation credit if we made a comment every single day in class, and by God, I kept a record of it right there in my notebook, you know, every day. And the motivation was I need to say something so I get points, not do I have anything to say. It was make a comment so I can get, you know, so if he asks, I can identify that I'd done that. Okay. Are there some other problems or issues with participation that are troubling or vexing for you? Because now we're going to start talking about solutions, so we want to get all the cards on the table. Yeah.
I think sometimes you also have to get a good feel for your students. There are students who just aren't going to participate as much.
Right.
It doesn't necessarily mean that they're not participating. There might be a lot going on in their minds, but they're not the types that are going to be willing to speak out in public. So I try not to punish those students. Encourage them to participate more openly, but also realize that it may just not be their style of communication.
Exactly.
So
That's a wise insight, and I think one of the things that I would take from that comment is the challenge for all of us to consider or reconsider how we actually define participation, and is it exclusively a verbal exchange between students, or does it have a nonverbal dimension as well, so that someone who is really listening and nodding and responding, that is participation? Are there other ways that students can participate? The other question I think that is really interesting, if we had more than an hour, I would get you talking about this, is do students have the right to remain silent in a class? See, now I would say if you want to learn French, it's not a possibility. But if you're taking a math class, can you learn algebra without participating? Can you learn history without participating? And so do students have a right to remain silent in class? Yeah.
That actually, I teach criminal justice, and when I called on someone, they said, "Don't I have the right to remain silent?"
Oh, there you go.
And I thought, you are getting it. So I said, absolutely. But anything else that in this class can and may be held against
Perfect example. Yeah, perfect example. But that's an interesting sort of question, because I worry sometimes, and I'll get you just a second. I don't have any of these on the sheet, but if you're interested, send me an email and I can send you some references. Because I think if you faculty say, oh yeah, students have to participate in my class, and that one of the motivations for doing that is that that reason we talked about developing the poise and the confidence, the ability, because in the world of work, in most cases, you're going to be called on and you're going to have to speak. But the research is really pretty clear that calling on students in class, forcing the participation, does not increase their participation in subsequent classes where they're not called on but allowed to volunteer. And if you talk to faculty members, there's a few faculty members who didn't participate when they were undergraduates. And if they will participate now, I've had any number of them just sort of say, I hated those classes where teachers called on me, and it did not develop my confidence and make me. So it's an interesting question, this whole business about whether or not students. Please.
I was just going to say, from a law school perspective, it's required.
Yeah.
And so undergraduate students, their first year, coming to the law school without that experience, they struggle at times. And they sometimes want to refuse to talk or to deliver, and you can't do that. The professional school training is for that purpose. So it's sort of hard for some undergraduate students, if they're not asked to do it here at the undergraduate level, to then do it at professional school. Yeah. So it's it's a different way of handling it maybe in undergrad, but for especially for law school, it's much different. They have to be able to do it.
Sure. And I think that's part of, people that teach in pre-law programs need to understand that, in the same way that you're not going to learn French with, by reading a book about it. Sometimes you simply have to participate. Okay? Uh-huh.
Well, I think the same kind of things. People, now classes are so diverse, and people, there's some people from all kinds of cultures are in the classroom, and some cultures they don't. Exactly. They prefer to be silent, or they're not able to.
Or that's the educational experience they've had. Exactly. So that's, I think, another piece.
So how do you involve them, and in what way? Right. That's the challenge.
Well, again, I think that's something that you sort of have to explore. My feeling is, if you're going to live and work in this culture, there are very few professions where there are not some pretty serious consequences if you're not able to speak up and represent your team or answer questions in public, and those sorts of things. So, but I think we can talk a little more about that as we go through. Let's see now. Who said once you start the participation? There we go, Dave.
I'm dealing right now in a class of peer pressure to not participate.
Oh yes,
because I know I've got some really sharp kids there.
And they don't want to.
It's an undergrad-grad combination, and you want them to talk, but there's such a peer pressure that don't say anything, because then you know, people are going to think you're a hot shot or something
Hot shot,
like
that kind of stuff.
And I have not had that very often in 40
Yeah,
some years
that
of
is
teaching, but I've got it going on right now, and it's really frustrating.
Yeah, but on the sheet there you know, there is some indication that that students' decision to participate is very much influenced by the peer pressure in the class, you know, and that students are much more concerned about what their peers in the class are thinking about them than what the teacher is thinking about them. So I think that's an important bit to do. But let's see if we can't, you know, kind of address that. So I need to like make a transition here and start talking about solutions in a little more systematic and organized way here. And what I'd like to start by talking about are so how do we solve some of these problems that we've talked about? And in the communication literature, believe it or not, there is something that's called para-communication, which are sort of those dimensions or aspects of how we implement or use participation in class that do have a fairly significant impact on who participates and how they participate in class. Now, some of this is just real straightforward. We can zoom right through it because it really should be just a review. Wait time. The forever anonymous, regular, old faculty member waits how long after asking a question before doing something? People in education should not speak up here because this has been well established in the basic realm, in the realm of basic ed, and it's pretty well known there. The research at the college level confirms exactly the same thing. So how long? Joseph, I'm calling on you. How long do you wait after asking a question before doing something?
Well, at the beginning of the semester, I went longer, but 10 weeks into the semester, I get a little bit short.
Oh, you're behind.
I was going to say I might wait, 15 seconds at the beginning.
15 seconds. Okay. All right. What do you think? Is that high or low for the forever anonymous regular old faculty member? Yeah, that's high.
That's high.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I'm a new faculty member, so.
Well, some of the most compelling studies, or I would say the most impressive work done in higher education has been done by Mary Budrow in chemistry. So is there anybody here who teaches chemistry? Okay, so well, see, we're all excused because in chemistry, this forever anonymous regular old faculty member waited 2.3 seconds after asking a question before doing something. Now, the interesting part about this is that, and this is true in a variety of the studies, is that when they ask faculty members how long they're waiting, they report that they're waiting between 10 and 12 seconds. And I think there's a simple explanation for that. I think it's that discomfort that a person feels when you're standing up there, what feels like before God and everyone, and asking a question. I mean, it really can become a kind of a power struggle